Hey there, I just wanted to let you know that on October 29th at 7 p.m. Central, I'm hosting an online get-together where we're going to noodle on how to navigate an accelerated retirement. I'll be sharing some wisdom that I've learned through my practice and answering your questions, so I would love for you to join me. And you can do that by going to livewithroger.com. Now on with the show. You are a decision-making machine. And you can choose to make decisions intentionally or by default. Totally up to you. And how you decide is what we're going to talk about today on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Welcome to the show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. And this is a show dedicated to helping you make better decisions so you can not just survive retirement, but you can rock retirement. So today is a special episode. We're going to have a long conversation with Annie Duke, who is an expert at decision making. She's the author of the bestseller, Thinking in Bets, great book, and the author of the brand new book just coming out, just in the last day or so, How to Decide, Simple Tools for Making Better Choices. And your choices and how you improve making better decisions, even just by a little bit over time, is the biggest lever in whether you rock retirement or not. You can pull that lever if you can incrementally improve the quality of your decision making, because you have a ton of decisions to make in this new phase of life. We talk about them for the last 6 years and more to come. And if we can just improve the quality of our decision making by a little bit, that is everything to rocking retirement. That's everything to the agile retirement management process that we created. Now, I'm not saying that the markets, inflation, politics, life circumstance don't have a big role, but we can't control those, but we can control our decision making. So this is essentially what the show is always about, is how do we make decisions, better decisions about these things. So 2 things before we get to Annie's conversation. Number 1 is, if you're signed up for 6 Shots Saturday, we're going to give you a free chapter of Annie's new book, How to Decide. So you'll get that in the Saturday email, a link where you can just download the PDF and check out our new book and maybe get some tips to help you in decision making. If you're not signed up for 6 Shots Saturday, you can go to rogerwhitney.com, and right there on the first page, you enter your email and your name, and we'll send you an email once a week on Saturdays with some quick tips and resources like this to get Annie's chapter. Second, I want to remind you that on October 29th, that's Thursday, at 7 p.m., we're going to have a Retirement Answer Man just get together. Call it a webinar, call it what you want, where we're going to talk about how do we make decisions if we have an unexpected retirement, whether it's by force or by package. And we'll have a link to signing up for that in 6 Shots Saturday as well. And we'd love just to join you. I'm going to have my comments, and we're just going to hang out, and I'm going to answer your questions, and maybe we can all work on navigating these crazy times together. So that will be on October 29th. And with that, let's go have a chat with Annie Duke. So Annie, the listener of this show is generally at the approach of a major life change. They're going to leave their full-time career and create a new life as they enter a season. They call it retirement, but it's a lot of different things. And there are a lot of decisions to make. And that's why I wanted to chat with you about better decisions, because your view is that there are 2 things that really create a great life. And so why don't you start with those 2 things are?
Thanks, Roger. Yeah. So basically, it's pretty simple. There are only 2 things that determine the way your life turns out. And the first is luck. And the second is the quality of your decisions. So what do I mean by luck? Chance in the sort of colloquial sense that we think about random things that happen. But I also think about it as decisions of others that are out of your realm of influence, right? So what Russia decides to do, like if Russia decided to invade its neighbors, obviously that's a matter of luck from my perspective, because I have no say in the matter, right? So there's luck. And that would include things like what year you were born in, which for me really matters because not too long ago, I wouldn't have been allowed to own property. So now I can own property. That's a good thing. So we can think about that. And then the other thing is the quality of your decisions. And that actually you have quite a bit of control over. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is get people to do two things. One is get comfortable and accept the fact that luck has a lot of influence, but also see it really clearly, really acknowledge what its influence is in a more objective way. But then also like say, okay, I see you. I can't really do anything about you, but I can see you. So let me really get laser focused on the quality of my decisions, because that's the thing that can actually improve my life.
And what I got from the first book, Thinking in Bets, the one thing that really hit me was you're typically making decisions with very little information. And you use the example of chess versus poker, right? Poker is very dynamic. Outside actors can play upon you. And I think of somebody making the decision to retire, there's a lot of unknowns, right? There's a lot of luck of sequence of returns with markets, inflations, Russia, and what it does to this, that, and the other thing. That's paralyzing. And it does come down to, how do I make the next little decision correctly? So I guess my question is, all decisions aren't equal, right? Making a decision to marry my wife 30 years ago was a big decision. Getting up and going to the restaurant is a smaller decision. First off, do we have to identify what the high stakes decisions are versus the common decisions?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. Going to a restaurant nowadays might be a bigger decision than it used to be. I just want to say that. Yes. Okay. So it's such a good question and it's so deep and there's kind of a lot to unpack there. So let's try to unpack it in pieces so that we can keep this conversation really flowing. Okay. So we can think about what would a fully formed decision process be that helps you to make decisions under uncertainty, right? So we could think about uncertainty as coming from two places. One is luck, which we already talked about, no control over that. But the other has to do with imperfect information, as you said. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know. Not the least of which, by the way, is if we make a decision, which of all the possible ways that that decision could turn out is actually going to be the thing that we observe, right? But then there's just a bunch of stuff that we don't know. Like if we're investing in the stock market, for example, there's all sorts of things about the companies that we might be investing in that we just can't have full knowledge of. So we're generally making decisions under those circumstances. It makes the problem really hard. But let's imagine that we could come up with a process that's very deliberative and it's going to take some time, which has to do with thinking about really mapping out what are the different ways that these things can turn out if I choose an option, identifying what all the options are. So you have to then repeat that for every single option. Thinking about some forecast of the probability of each of those possibilities unfolding, as well as how much do each of those possibilities advance you towards your goal? How much do they cause you to retreat away from your goal? That would be just sort of upside and downside potential of your decisions. And you obviously have to be doing that while trying to figure out how do I get enough information to really increase the accuracy of these kinds of forecasts that I'm making of the future. Now, you can imagine that if you brought that sort of what the complete process, the most robust version of that process was to bear on your decisions, it would be hard for you to ever get out the door.
It would.
Because you'd be like, what should I wear today? Well, let me take all of my options in my closet and figure out, let me forecast how I'm going to fit. You can see, I mean, it would take a long time. So we need to have some way to say time is a valuable resource and how are we really allocating our times toward the decisions that we make, while also trying to figure out how are we also maximizing the information that we're getting? Because in this world, information is like royalty. That's the thing that can really change the quality of your decisions, because the big thing that's mucking around that you can control is this imperfect information problem, right? Can't do anything about luck, but I can increase the quality of my information, but that takes time. So we want to figure out a way to balance those things out. And the answer is, and we can get into why, we can go deeper into this. The answer is for most things, going really fast is actually better. And then there's a very small class of decisions, and you need to know what type of decision you're dealing with, where you should really slow down and you should really apply this robust process.
I think that idea of fast is better, because one thing I see in planning in my world, and I see in our Rock Retirement Club, is the search for more precision, not understanding that in a forecast of their spending for 30 years. And so much iteration on trying to get more precise when it's not getting you any more accuracy. So there's a balance there of just, at some point, just make your best guess and move on, because you're going to have to iterate that sort of, you're moving fast. So other than those big decisions where you really have to slow down, the iteration, because you'll continually get new information on these things that are very unknown, is critical.
Yeah. So you can kind of think it this way. I mean, we're making decisions behind the veil of ignorance mostly. So the problem is that a lot of times the information that we need to know, that literally the best way to gather it is to essentially ask. And the way that we ask is to actually do something. So like, for example, like if I'm trying to decide, do I want to take piano lessons? I could go read a bunch of people who've written long thought pieces on piano playing and how it increases their happiness. I could talk to people who've taken piano lessons. I could do a whole bunch of stuff and take a lot of time doing research on it. But in the end, the best way for me to actually come to some sense of certainty about whether I like piano or not is to go take a lesson. And I think that part of the problem is that's sort of obvious when it comes to something like piano lessons, but it's not so obvious when you get into other types of decisions that aren't quite so clear. And I think that this is really a lot of what kind of hangs us up, because the more that we can be iterating that, the more that we can understand what are my preferences, because that's really what taking the piano lesson is telling you, right? The more that I can figure out what are my values, what are the things that I value, the more that I can find out how the world's going to react to something that I do. And I think that we have this really big problem, particularly in the information environment that we live in now, which is that there's so much data, right? If I'm considering a trip somewhere, I can spend so much time on TripAdvisor and just like a whole bunch of different types of sites that I'll get reviews from. And I could go on Twitter and I could say, hey, I'm thinking about a vacation. What does everybody think about this? And there's so much information available. And when you start to get into things that have to do with like business or retirement planning or that kind of thing, there's so much data that I think that we really operate under the illusion that we would have regardless, but it gets exacerbated, that somehow we can know for sure. Somehow, if we just get a little more information, if we ask another person, if we find another data point, that somehow we can be certain about the way that the world will unfold if we choose a particular option, if we make a particular decision. And that's just, you just can't.
You essentially miss your life. You can miss your life doing that.
Right. Time is a valuable resource, right? Like you have to be aware of where am I putting my decision-making time? Am I putting it in something where taking the time to do it is actually going to really increase my returns? Or am I putting it into something where I am just living so in fear that if I make a decision and it doesn't turn out well, that I'm going to beat myself up for having made the decision in the first place, because if I had only gotten more information, I would have known. And the thing that's interesting is that while in a thought experiment kind of way, it's really obvious that probably shouldn't be spending so much time. You should just go take the stupid piano lesson. Even so, if I take the piano lesson and I hate it, my reaction will generally be, well, why did I do that? That was stupid.
Yeah. And that's one thing you talk about in terms of how we judge decisions. Why don't we talk about that? Because that's really important, I think, in terms of making better decisions and acknowledging how we trick ourselves.
So I think that this is actually part of the answer to how to figure out how to speed up, if we understand this. So I think that part of what kind of hangs us up and makes us slow down on decisions is kind of how are we going to feel in the immediate aftermath of the decision not working out well. So there's certain financial advisors actually that kind of use this, are you going to regret it if you lose strategy, right? And I actually am not like a huge fan of that, because I think that that actually exacerbates this kind of short-termism problem, which is, so let's take a super simple example. In the before times when I would go to restaurants, I was trying to choose between the chicken and the fish. And we all have those friends, right? They're like 15 minutes. They're asking the wait staff. It's just torturous to try to see them like try to choose a meal. And I think that my intuition as to what's going on there is that if the food comes back, like let's say they order the chicken and it comes back and it's dry, they're so caught up in that feeling that they made a poor choice, that they did something wrong, that they made a mistake. And I think that that fear of kind of the regret that you feel as a downside outcome actually reveals itself, right? That's actually what happens, makes us want to spend all that time trying to get to some higher level of certainty about like whether the chicken or fish is bad. And so this is kind of the problem I have with some of these sort of regret minimization strategies, is that you're asking someone, like you buy Apple, right? On the day that you find out that that lost 5% of its value, how are you going to feel on that day? Everybody's going to feel really crappy. So I think this is going to create some aversion to those kinds of decisions. But if we could do the right kind of time traveling, and instead of mentally time travel to the immediate aftermath of the poor outcome. And instead time travel much further in advance to try to figure out, if I were to think long-term, right? Because our goals are long-term. What kind of impact is this going to have on my long-term outcomes? Then I think we can get to a more rational place and not being so afraid of making what, quote unquote, a bad choice. So if we go back to like the really simple example of the chicken or the fish, like let's say that we went to the restaurant and you were agonizing over it and you ordered the chicken and it was dry and you were sad. And let's say I see you in a year, like it's a year after we've had this meal where you had this horrible chicken. And I just say to you, Roger, hey, do you think that meal affected your happiness at all today? Like, as you think about how happy you are today, like what's your level of satisfaction in your life today? How'd that meal affect this? What would the answer be?
Likely not at all.
I hope not.
Likely.
I don't know what's going on in your life that like your dry chicken from a year ago has actually had any effect. So this is a way for me to probe for really what's the long-term impact of the decision, because I can shorten the time frame. So I could say, well, what if I saw you in a month, right? What if I saw you in a week? And I think that when it comes to dry chicken, like probably in a week, it's not going to have mattered much to your happiness for that week. And there's other things where you can sort of figure out, is this something that's going to have an effect on you over the course of the next week, over the course of the next month, 6 months, a year? And what you end up finding out is a lot of stuff in relation to achieving your goals doesn't really have high impact, even though in the moment of making the decision, it feels like it has really high impact.
And a lot of times we make those decisions thinking that they're forever, right? If you start playing piano, it's a binary decision. You're playing piano forever, not remembering that we can always quit or pivot.
Yeah. So that's so insightful. That actually brings up kind of the other piece of how do you go fast? So the first piece is this impact question, right? Really probe for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve with the decision. Think about sort of the reasonable bad ways that that decision could turn out and try to figure out if sort of in the long run in relationship to your goals, this is going to really have any effect on achieving those goals. So I talk about the happiness test because I think happiness in general is a good proxy for any kind of goal that you could have. And just ask yourself in a year, is it going to have affected my happiness? So that's the impact piece. And when you have a low impact decision, you should get really experimental. You should go fast, just go fast and break stuff, right?
Like my brother-in-law, we always go to a local restaurant and he just takes whatever the recommendation is and doesn't worry about it.
Right. That's such a happier way to live your life. Yeah. So then the other piece that you just mentioned has to do with optionality. So I think you're right. You're exactly right that when people approach decisions, they think about it as if this is a permanent choice.
That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure if you think that.
Right. I think that that's sort of just generally the way the human mind works. I think there's a lot of push for stick-to-itiveness right now, where we all know that like if you stick to stuff, like this is the way that you're successful. But the thing is that you have to be picky about what you stick to, right? Like if you stuck to everything that you did, you wouldn't be good at anything.
I'd still have Allure shirts on in Jordache if I stuck to that.
That is true. That's really just a terrifying thought. But yeah, so exactly. So if instead, again, we can kind of do some time travel again, and we can say, let me think about this. Like if I make this decision where I'm choosing a particular option, which means that I'm rejecting other options, and those have some costs associated with the rejection. But so I'm picking piano and not guitar today, or not tennis, whatever I could be spending that time on. If I do this thing, how easy is it for me to say, I'm going to cut my losses here. I don't really like it. It's not working out well. The world is kind of letting me know this isn't for me. To be able to pivot back and either choose one of the options I originally rejected, or maybe a brand new option that I haven't thought about before, or that's just presented itself to me. So one of the things obviously that happens is that I think because of opportunity costs, right? If I choose to do one thing, I'm foregoing all the other choices. That also I think weighs pretty heavily on us. But if we think through this quit-to-itiveness model, like how easy is it for me to pivot? That actually mitigates the opportunity cost, because what I'm saying is, but I can go right back to those things.
And it helps you identify which decisions you need to slow down for getting married and which decisions you can really speed up on.
Right. So actually we can use the impact and optionality for just that type of decision to really see it. When I date, the impact of one bad date in general is not going to be particularly long-term. I'm not assuming that we have some of the tail events happen here, but within the realm of normal ways that dates kind of go poorly, probably not going to have a big impact on you long term, the single date. And the second thing is that if you don't like the date, you can go and find another person to go on a date with. So we can see both of those things kind of happening. And then we can actually bring in a third piece, which is the other way you can go really fast is if you can do a bunch of things at once. So I could take piano and guitar. So I could do a bunch of things at once. And obviously this is portfolio theory, right? Like I don't need to choose one stock. I could put lots of stocks in my basket. I don't even need to choose one asset class. I could exercise a whole bunch of those at the same time. And we can see that with dating as well, right? I don't need to date only one person. I could date many people. So that's the difference between marriage, where at least if it's obviously a monogamous marriage where there's a commitment to monogamy, then we're in a totally different situation. Now you can't be married to more than one person in parallel, assuming you've made that commitment, right? So hopefully not, right?
So you better slow down before you make the decision.
Right. It obviously has a big impact on your life, right? Like who you choose to marry is actually going to have a long-term impact on your happiness. And it's much harder to quit. I mean, divorce is no fun. It's hard to do. There's big costs associated with it, particularly if you have children. It's a whole other thing than dating. And so I think that actually creates like the perfect contrast, right? So what we always want to ask ourselves when we're entering into a decision is, are we in a dating situation or are we in a marrying situation?
Yeah, that's an important distinction of prioritizing how big of a decision is between those two realms. So you talk about a lot of us make decisions by our gut. In the financial planning world, the way I see it is triggers are the things that usually spur people into action. I should do a Roth IRA, or I should invest in this cool investment. And generally that's where people's minds live, at least in my observation. And a lot of times they'll go with the gut or try to solve a tactical decision, not really having a process and a strategy beforehand. And if you have the strategy and process, it makes the tactical stuff a lot easier, but people don't want to live there. They want to go for it by their gut. And I think that's sort of the argument of your book. Here are some tools to actually help you with that strategy of making decisions, so you don't just have a closet full of things that don't match because you just bought tactical cool things you saw in the store. So what are some things that get in the way? You talk about hindsight bias and resulting, which I think is what we sort of discussed. But how do we fix that? What's the first step?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, first of all, if I can just linger a second over
Sure.
the gut issue for a second. So when I say like on these things where you can go fast, I'm actually not saying like just go with your gut here, right? Because you notice, again, it's strategic thinking. So I agree with you, like tactics without strategy are just running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Like you're just sort of bumping into stuff and saying, I'll do this. This looks good right now.
Exactly. But they're usually the triggers to make you want to do something in the first place, right?
Exactly. So this idea of like, when can you kind of like implement a pretty skinny version of whatever decision process that you have? It's really kind of thinking strategically about what type of decision am I facing? What type of decision environment am I in? Is the information available that would actually increase my accuracy? If it is available, can I afford it? Like, do I want to take the time to go get it? Do I need to? Right? Can I even resolve the differences? I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can start thinking about. Obviously, all that are in my book, it's a strategy for trying to figure out when can I go fast and when can I go slow. People really are into their gut. And first of all, let me just say a little bit why I think that is that I think that people don't like the idea that I'm a good decision maker because I'm using a process that I could give to somebody else and allow them to create a great process also. And then they would be a great decision maker as well. Because I think that as human beings, we sort of like credit. We'd like to feel like there's something special about us that only we can do. It helps our self-narrative along. So we don't want to have the idea that there would be some repeatable process that I could like teach to somebody else and maybe they could do something similar to what I'm doing. And of course, you want to marry the two, right? I mean, you could take all the tennis lessons in the world and you're not going to be Roger Federer. I mean, with the best decision process, there's still some people who are going to be much better decision makers than other. It's just going to lift the ocean, which is really good for society. And it's certainly going to be really good for your own decision making. And if you're in a leadership role, it's going to be great for your team because instead of saying, this is my gut, like, I hope you can develop those instincts too, you're actually helping your team to learn how to execute decisions within your business, for example, or your life. So that's just kind of why people like the gut. The reason why it's bad as a tool to make decisions is that you can't look at it. So this kind of goes to this problem of resulting in hindsight bias and like, how do we resolve it? Is that these go into this category of the best way to improve your decision-making is through examining your experiences. In fact, experience is absolutely necessary for becoming a better decision maker, but it's not sufficient. And the reason it's not sufficient is that you have to be able to go back and examine what were the things that I was thinking about? What did I know at the time of the decision? What drove that decision? What was my process coming to that decision? So that I can then sort of look, particularly over the long run, this is helpful. I can look and say, given the experiences that I've now had, how can I now go back and close that feedback loop in order to figure out, like, what did I do pretty well? What did I not do well? What information did I overlook? So on and so forth, in order to improve your process going forward. And that's where the problem with the gut is that I can't do that because your gut's a black box. There is no way to examine it.
And you make this argument in your previous book, Thinking in Bets, too. In this resulting is, if we make a decision, and I'll use poker, if we lose the hand, we're going to feel bad that we lost the hand, but we need to divorce that from our self-talk of, I followed all of the process that I had. And so affirm yourself that you followed the process regardless of the decision or the consequence, which is really hard to do.
Right.
Right. We always want to say it was a good decision or bad decision because it worked or it didn't work, which is not really what you're arguing.
So there's a narrative in the book, which I think demonstrates this really well. This is kind of the collision of resulting and hindsight bias. So resulting is, I think I know something about the quality of the decision because I know how it turned out. So if it turned out poorly, must be a bad decision. If it turned out well, must be a great decision. Maybe that's why some people say they drive better when they're drunk. I'm not sure, but that's basically where that kind of logic leads you. Hindsight bias adds to the ruckus, because what hindsight bias does is it causes you, once the outcome has revealed itself to you, to think you knew something that you did not actually know, or to feel like the particular outcome was inevitable. So both of those things are bad, right?
It'll get you lazy in your future decision-making.
Well, the problem is, if you believe that you knew something before that you didn't actually know as you were thinking about something or making a decision, then when you go back and try to correct it, you're not going to correct it properly because you're going to misremember. You have to have a good memory in order to get better. That you need to have that in order for experience to teach you anything, right? You have to remember your experience. And then if you feel like the outcome was inevitable, that kind of ultimately leads to resulting, right? Because if I feel like the outcome was inevitable, then it must be also that the decision itself was bad, because otherwise a bad outcome couldn't be inevitable if the decision itself was good. And it causes us to lose sight of this really important thing that has to do with luck, which is any option that you're considering has a lot of different ways that it could turn out. And once you make the decision, that kind of sets the possibilities, but which possibility you observe, that has to do with luck. So I could make a choice that 95% of the time is going to work out great and 5% of the time it's going to work out horribly. And I'm going to observe the 5%. And I know exactly how often I'm going to observe it, 5% of the time. I just don't know when. So we can think about how hindsight bias and resulting really kind of marry to create this really big problem with learning from experience, because it produces this inevitability feeling that these things are more tightly connected than they are. And it causes you to misremember your experience. So there's a spectacular example of this. So I was really curious, November 9th, 2016. Now, this is a very important date, right? So this is the day after Donald Trump wins the election. I started seeing a bunch of pundits on television and thought pieces and op-eds and opinion writers talking about Clinton's ridiculously bad strategy as it related to Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And in particular, how she was stupid and everybody knew it.
Sunday morning quarterbacking.
Well, yeah, because I started thinking to myself, well, not necessarily, right? Because maybe everybody did know, right?
Yeah.
I started thinking to myself, I was like, I'm a pretty big consumer of news. I don't remember people saying this beforehand. So for the purposes of this book, I think the Google search was Clinton, 2016, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. I think that's what I put in.
Okay.
So clearly, hundreds of articles are going to come up throughout that election cycle saying, what is she doing in Florida? Why is she in North Carolina? She should be in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So there's lots and lots of articles that come up arguing that point. But the amazing thing is the date of the first one is November 9th. But everybody's claiming that this was like obvious. Clearly, She should have been in those states. But we can see what the problem is that beforehand, those states were polling at pretty wide margins. They were like 5%, 7% in favor of Clinton. And the states that were looking really close were Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire. Those were all looking like toss-ups. So we can all think about, and obviously I don't know what her internal polling was, right? I'm only going off of the public polling data. That what would you do as a campaign strategist? You'd be like, look, here are all these toss-ups. Like, you should definitely go over there. And the issue is that clearly, like, we can kind of look in retrospect and we can say, oh, well, there was obviously a polling error in those 3 states, clearly. So that then becomes another problem, which is, first of all, a polling error only reveals itself after the fact. And second of all, it wasn't a consistent polling error because Florida ended up exactly where the poll said, and New Hampshire ended up exactly where the poll said. So it wasn't like she could sort of predict there's sort of this polling error period. And by the way, the national vote ended up right where it was. So I'm not sure what the argument is for her strategy stunk outside of the fact that it turned out that those 3 states were really important. And I certainly don't buy the argument of everybody knew it beforehand because there would be an evidentiary record of such a thing. And in fact, the only articles that you can find on the topic of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan are ones criticizing Trump for campaigning there. They were like, why is he there? Right? So I think that it's such a good example of kind of seeing this. And then what's really wonderful about it is it kind of tells us how to solve it. Because if our problem is we need to learn from experience, and we don't remember our experience very well, then having a record of your experience is really helpful.
And if we don't remember our experiences correctly without the filter of hindsight.
That is exactly right. So the only reason I know all these pundits are full of doo-doo is because there's an evidentiary record of it. I can go back and look. And so we can think about those kinds of things that are happening with that sort of that type of example are happening to you in little ways and big ways every single day of your life. So the wonderful thing about creating a really good decision process is that it naturally, because I'm not a big fan of like specifically journal your decisions. What I want to do is have people do the work in front of the decision that will actually help the decision quality. And then in the wake of that, you've created a record that you can go back and look at.
I think of planning, execution, after action report.
Exactly.
Right. And this can be lean. I mean, and you have a framework in your book to teach how to do it. And it can seem a little overwhelming just because of the graphs and everything else, but it can be really lean.
Oh, yeah.
And it's somewhat a muscle you have to build. And once you build the muscle, it just sort of happens intuitively.
It starts to go really fast. So when I come in and I work with companies or teams, when we initially put in this kind of pre-work, it's clunky and it's a little bit slow. And they're like, I don't know, this is kind of clunky. And I'm sort of facilitating in order to get them kind of used to this way of thinking. And by about the 4th or 5th try, they're like, this makes everything so much more efficient. So it actually ends up saving time because it focuses you in A, on what's important about the decision. B, it gets you really comfortable with deciding under uncertainty. So instead of saying, I need to be 90% sure that this is the right thing to do, you start getting really comfortable with like, well, I'm 60%, let's do it. It's all good. So that ends up saving time. Because you have like this repeatable process about the way that you're supposed to be thinking through these decisions that's shared with the people that are shared in that decision with you, it just focuses the conversation in on what's important, which makes the conversation much more efficient.
Process, strategy, tactics.
Exactly. And then everybody's on the same page. We're all speaking the same language and everything goes along much more smoothly. And in doing so, you get this natural kind of evidentiary record in your wake, where then when we go back to after action review, one of the problems that I find with after action reviews, because we don't keep a very good record, is that they tend to be triggered by poor outcomes. Mm-hmm. And they don't get triggered really by anything else. And if we think back to that problem that I said of you're ordering the restaurant, you're just afraid of getting if I order the chicken, I can somehow get that wrong. If after action reviews are really postmortems rather, then what are you telling people? Like, be very afraid of getting it wrong. So I like to do this thought experiment, which I'll do with you.
Oh boy.
This one's actually not in the book, but it's related to the content in the book. So let's say that we're in a group that's investing in commercial real estate, and
which I've done.
That could be a great opportunity right now, right? So depending on how the market is pricing that, right? So maybe we believe that work from home is not going to continue to the degree that it is, and that commercial real estate is going to be undervalued at the moment because people really caught up in the idea that everybody's going to be staying home. And that even if people do go back to work, they're going to need big footprints. So even if only half your workforce goes back to work, you're going to still need the same footprint in order to keep people far enough apart. So this is our thesis.
Okay.
So we've run a model based on our thesis. And we say, if we invest in this project, we think that in 2 years, this is what this thing is going to appraise at. Okay. So we've created a model. We now have a point forecast of this is what it's going to appraise at. So now we fast forward to 2 years from now. And it's appraised 15% lower than what our expectations are. Are we having a meeting about it?
Depending on the initial time frame that we're investing, likely not.
No, well, we know that we've lost 15% on the investment.
But if our time frame is 10 plus years.
No. This is it. We've realized the loss.
So are we having a meeting about whether it was a good decision or not? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. We lost 15% on the investment. Are we in a room talking about this?
Following your line, if you had a meeting, it would be, okay, what information did we not know? And how is our thesis incorrect?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Right?
But we're having a meeting and it's a pretty long meeting, right?
Okay.
We're doing a pretty deep dive. Now, I agree with you. I think that most people nowadays are going to be talking in process terms. I totally agree with you about that. So it's going to be like, let's think about our model. Let's try to figure out our thesis. We're not so worried that it didn't work out. Those words will probably come out of their mouth, but you've had a very long meeting about it. Okay. So now new thought experiment, same setup. We have a model. We've forecasted what we can exit for in 2 years. We exit 15% higher than expected. Are we having a meeting about our process?
Nope.
Are we having champagne?
Yes.
Yeah. Are we thinking about how smart we are that we were so right?
Oh, we're just going to feel it almost subconsciously.
Right.
We're just going to be ever.
This is really kind of where my book gets you to, although this type of thought experiment isn't in there. So we can see the whole problem like wrapped into this.
We never revisit good decisions in terms of.
You lose half the opportunities to learn, number one, right? Because half the time when things work out at the tails on the good side, we're not talking about it. That's number one. Number two, what have you reinforced for everybody around you? Don't lose.
From a cultural standpoint.
Do not have a bad outcome.
Because we will look at it and examine it.
We will look at it. And by the way, the only way you're going to get out of it is if you can tell me that this is the way everything did. Everybody had consensus. You got sign off from 5 different people, right? Who's ever going to innovate under those circumstances? Who's ever going to feel that they can make a riskier choice that might have higher expected value? Nobody. So you're quashing innovation. You're reinforcing this fear of short-term bad outcomes to the sacrifice of what might be long-term success. That's number 2. And then number 3 is this. What we really care about in terms of becoming better decision makers is to be really good forecasters of the future. That's all we care about. Because what is a decision?
Yeah,
a decision is a forecast of the future. I'm saying if I choose this option, I believe that my future will, on average, look better than if I choose this option over here, right? So now we have this problem, which is that we are not allowing ourselves to really explore the quality of our forecasts anymore. Because up or down, I don't care if you're under allocating or over allocating. In either case, you're making a mistake. And the world turned out in a way that you did not expect in either case, because we recorded it. We said, we made a forecast. This is what we think this is going to price at. Here's why we think that this is going to be the case. This is what we think the world is going to look like. There's all sorts of things that we've now done the work for. And we should be checking back on that and saying, why did this do so well? Because we weren't expecting that.
I have 2 thoughts real quickly. One is, if you examine the losses from a process thesis standpoint and the successes, one thing I really like about that is when you're successful, it forces you to be humble and focus on process and not get overconfident. And when you fail, it protects your self-esteem, because if you did the process correctly, that's where your result is, not the result. So it's a way of being humble.
Right. And by the way, if you didn't do the process correctly, you should be incredibly happy because you found out. So now you can improve your process going forward. If we're sort of shoving that away and saying, I don't want to know if my process wasn't good because that's going to feel really bad. Guess what? You're going to apply that crappy process to every decision you make in the future. So if you believe that the earth is flat, wouldn't it be nice if someone told you it was round and that you were open-minded and listened to it? And then the other thing it does is it says to you, basically, how much variance from our point forecast are we willing to tolerate before it gets us in a room? So what happens is a lot of the kind of bad quality outcomes, if we define it just by win or loss, you don't even look at them. And so people start to feel like, oh, like it's okay to have a bad outcome because we're tolerating this band. And it's only when we kind of get outside of that band that it gets us in a room. And we don't care if it's on the good end or the bad end. We just want to examine it. Sometimes the answer is going to be, it was a tail event. We feel like everything was good. Our model is good. It was just a tail event.
So I can imagine the difficulty is with incentives. So I think of an advisor trying to earn a client. The client being a decision-making partner in process is not as attractive as somebody who says they're going to win for you. And no different in the corporate world with people that you've consulted with, the incentives of the CEO or the COO are not necessarily always aligned with that. They're aligned with results.
So yeah, I hear you. I feel your pain. The question is, do you want to just kind of let human nature drag you along? Right. So when you think about this in terms of something like going with your gut, right? I'm saying like it's human nature to want to feel like there's something special about me that you could not repeat. I can look into your soul, right? I can just see the decision in a way that nobody else can. And I want to feel really good about that. So do you want that to lead you through life? Or do you want to say, I think there's a way to allow myself the same rewards that I would have, but in a way that's more helpful to my long-term well-being and goals? So when I think about what is a financial advisor doing, what I really recommend is selling on the difference. Everybody's going to offer you great returns.
Everything is table stakes except for helping people think better.
Right.
And make better decisions.
There's all sorts of ways that you can sort of bring them into the fold so that they can feel part of something special, where you can say to somebody, everybody's going to offer you great results. I'm going to bring you in as a thought partner. And here's the thing that I love about my clients is that we have a secret, right? Which is like open-mindedness to really thinking through this process and not falling for the sort of sales pitch of people guaranteeing you things that you can't get without really good process. And we really understand that you need to really engage and think through these problems and be open-minded to viewpoints that are different than yours and different strategies, and maybe do some experimenting, and we'll think through when that's appropriate. And you're going to see other people. It's very important to use this kind of group language. You're going to see other people, right, who are going to be promising this stuff. You're going to see other people who are just going with the trend of the day.
Well, I was thinking as a consumer, if you implement and you think in the way and use the tools of your book, you're going to inoculate yourself a little bit to those messages.
Right.
Of people that are just promising, playing on fear or greed or whatever.
Exactly. And then as an advisor, you can increase the chances that you win that client by telling them that they're going to belong to a special group that's really different than other groups, because you understand that that kind of short-termism, feel good, like I'm going to win, overconfidence, illusion of control, gambler's fallacy. We can start throwing in a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah, we did that with Dan Crosby.
Bias, bandwagoning, right? Right. I'm not going to tell you to go put all your money in Bitcoin, right? My clients, the way that we think, like we have a secret, and we know that what we do is a little bit harder than what other people do, but it makes us special. And you're going to hear other people, and you're going to hear the cognitive bias in what they say. You can hear the fallacies. You can hear that they're using the wrong heuristic. You're going to be able to hear that. And then you're going to come here and you're going to know, like, that's what I love about the clients that I work with, is that they think in a different way than other people. Now, notice, like, I've used all this language that allows us to be kind of like in a secret society, right? Like, but that's what we want. I mean, you can see that fingerprint all over in politics, but used in a way that's kind of destructive. Mm-hmm. But you can take that same thinking and say, look, human beings could not possibly have evolved to be tribal if there weren't advantages to it, right? Because otherwise it would have been selected out for. Like, you wouldn't have had as much reproductive success if there wasn't something about being tribal that was an advantage for us. And it was that being tribal allowed us to survive when we are very physically weak, and a house cat would beat us in a physical fight. Right? Okay, so how do you deal with that, right? We have these very big brains, but these pretty weak bodies, where I don't want to get involved in a fight with a 10-pound cat. So you created this tribe, right? So we know that there's some good things that come out of that. You just have to do it with intention. Instead of being sort of like washed along in the sea of kind of like the political tribalism that's happening, you can think about, how can I think about making good decision process part of what defines the specialness of the group of people that I'm in?
Yeah. And if you do it individually to find that group, because you're going to feel alone otherwise. I mean, if you're trying to make good decisions using the tools that you outline in your book, you're going to feel alone, and most people won't get it because they're going to say, oh, you lost. It was a horrible decision, when you know it's not so, but that still will seep into you if you don't have your people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then I think that you can, again, I've done this. I've repeated this with teams that I work with all the time, where most teams are kind of aligned around being on the same page, which translates to like, we all kind of agree and we have the same outlook on life and we have consensus. What should make teams great is cognitive diversity, is that you're bringing a lot of different viewpoints together that then are colliding in like a public square that should improve your decision quality, because it's going to help you solve this problem of we just don't have a lot of information on which to decide. So you'd like all the members of the team to be sharing their perspectives and their information, ideally. That's generally not what teams are kind of coalescing on. They're coalescing on this other thing, which is like, we all agree, we have the same model of the world, this echo chambery groupthink kind of thing. But I've worked with teams to change that, what it is that they're coalescing around. What is the main feature? And it becomes open-mindedness. And so they get exactly what you just said they needed, right? Other people who say, you're great, like we agree, you're great. But the thing that they're pegging on, like that they're indexing to in terms of what are you great about, it's being open-minded. Like you can have your cake and eat it too, right?
And ultimately, this is the goal of How to Decide, your book, is to use the tools that you outline to consistently make lots of decisions better in a consistent fashion. And then just by that, you change the curve.
I should just carry you around with me so that you can say what my book is. Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to describe what I'm trying to do. I think in the introduction, I talk about what is a tool, right? And the thing about a tool is that it's something where it has a particular purpose. If you use it for that purpose, it's very effective. If you don't use it for that purpose, the appropriate purpose, it's not particularly effective. I can hand the tool to somebody else. This is the problem with your gut. I can hand the tool to somebody else, tell them how to use it, and they could use it for the same purpose, right? So if I have a hammer, I can use it to drive nails. It'd be very bad if I was trying to break up asphalt. That would be a bad use of that tool. So I'm using it for the right purpose, which is to drive nails. I can hand it to you and I can say, Roger, this is what you do with this tool. You hold it by the handle and you hit the nail, right? And you could also repeat that. So I can teach it to you. And then I can keep using it the same way over and over again. And it's with a lot of fidelity, right? I'm always going to be able to get that nail into the wall if I'm using that hammer and I'm pulling out that appropriate tool for the appropriate purpose. And I think that we want to think about decision tools in the exact same way, which is why I'm so kind of like gut doesn't feel very good to me as a decision tool. So I want to be able to have a decision tool. I want to be able to use it for the purpose that it's meant to be used for in a way that's repeatable, where I can increase fidelity, right? Where it's repeatable. And then I want to be able to say, Roger, here's this tool. This is how you use it. This would be the purpose that you use it for. And I can teach you that. And you could then use that tool in the same way that I'm using it in order to apply it to your decision. And I think that if you don't have a good set of tools that allow you to do that, your decisions just aren't going to be consistently high quality. And ultimately, that's going to have a really bad effect on your outcomes.
And that will compound over time because you're making so many decisions.
Right.
Definitely.
That's all this book is trying to do. It's trying to give you a set of tools that are teachable, where you can repeat their use for the exact same purpose with fidelity. That's going to increase the quality of your decisions over time so that you're increasing the chances that you end up having good outcomes in your life.
Well, the premise of this show is you don't have to survive retirement. You can literally rock retirement with intentional decision-making. And this fits right in with that. And we'll be doing a book study in October in our club on your book. We're going to write a big book summary and we're going to do a book study on it because it is about better decision-making.
Oh, I'm excited. Thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Annie, this was awesome. I'm so excited that you're here and look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you.
Easy peasy. So check out her chapter that we're going to share in 6 Shot Saturday this week. And I would encourage you to buy a book. It's a great book. And I hope it's going to help you make better little decisions. You have a great week, okay? it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.